Welcome everyone and good evening to all the people who are listening to us as well. Um, so today we are going to speak on complexity thinking for ecosystem builders, designing partnerships that evolve. My name is Deepak Menon, and I am part of a group called Emergence, which is a group on complexity thinking and systems thinking. Most of us are based out of India, but have people outside of India who are interested in trying to discover a Indic understanding of systems thinking and complexity thinking. So that's our group which is converging together. All of us are from the group called Convergence, and we are hoping to have a great conversation today. Thank you everyone for coming. I know all of you are busy, and I'm glad that so many of you turned up today for this conversation. Before we start, I wanted to, it's a mouthful, the topic that we've chosen, which is complexity thinking for ecosystem builders and designing partnerships that evolve. So just wanted to take a couple of minutes to give a lay of the land, put the frame for our conversation. And for people who are listening to us who may not be new to complexity thinking, in a very simple way, complexity thinking is a way of understanding, way of thinking, that where we look at situations where outcomes emerge from interactions of different systems, different actors, and different relationships amongst these actors. And in complexity thinking, the cause and effect is obvious only in hindsight, and many times small actions can have disproportionate consequences. Hence the solutions are, rather than thought beforehand, the solutions are experimented, they are discovered, they are adapted. Yeah, so that's the idea of complexity thinking. A little bit introduction, and I think I will leave it to the roundtable members here to expand on that. For ecosystem builders are people who work within complex settings, who are nurturing relationships, and they go beyond their organizational boundaries to create conditions for social impact. So they're looking at the whole ecosystem rather than the health of the whole ecosystem rather than the health of only their organization. And from my experience and listening to people who have worked as ecosystem builders, our experiences have been that partnerships are different in when we are trying to build ecosystems. These partnerships tend to evolve, they adapt, they take forms that one has not imagined that they would, and it's very prone to give us pleasant surprises. Yeah, and this is what we wanted to unpack and uncover. And before we start on the actual conversation, wanted to check with any of you if you want to add to the frame that I've set for the conversation. Yes, thank you for your thumbs up. Others, as an opening gambit, that's fine. So what I wanted to focus on is, rather than talking about concepts and frameworks, is to look at the stories that we have already have, and use stories to speak about our experiences of partnerships. So if you could, any of you, and the way that we will do is, I'm not going to introduce all of you at front, but before you start speaking, just your names are there, but please speak your name and also what role you're playing, and keep your introductions brief. But what you would like to tell us is what kind of ecosystems are you building, or what are you part of, what are you shaping, what are you influencing, what makes this situation particularly complex, and what were the partnerships that you saw evolve over time, and how did they evolve the way they evolved. So what we're looking to do is to harvest stories at this point. Is that fine? I will leave the floor open for whomever who wants to start.
I think perhaps a lead-in is required, Deepak.
Yeah, okay. So to explain what that means.
What I mean to say is to set a more specific context, because one of the issues with trying to look at the stories of ecosystem builders in complex environments is that each person's definition of ecosystem and complexity will be very different. Yeah.
So you could start with your understanding of complexity, your understanding of partnerships, meaning we could do that, and I don't have a problem with that. In fact, that will make the conversation richer. Just looking at whatever is the situation that you found yourself in as you're shaping the ecosystem. And that's fine. The stories are more important and the definitions are less so. But if anybody wants to start, otherwise I'll start picking, which I'll enjoy thoroughly.
Let me start.
Yes.
Somebody has to volunteer and let me start then.
Yes.
So I introduce myself first. I am a doctor by training, work as a professor and head in the Department of Community Medicine in a medical college in northern part of India. In fact, it's a place which is close to Dharamshala. Dharamshala, you all must be familiar with. I've been working as a full-time professor for last 7 years now and heading the department as well. And my journey in complexity science has been very recent, and I would say it's been at the beginning of the pandemic itself. We started out in 2020. 2020 was the precise one, wherein I got in touch with people who work in the domain of complexity science across the world, are well-known names in the domain of complexity science. And the primary reason for us to get involved was to find solution to a problem which was emergent at that point in time, in a sense that we didn't know how to deal with COVID. And people around the world thought that India, in the first part at least, was doing well as far as COVID was concerned. And there must be something that is going in favor of India as far as tackling COVID and having lesser amounts of patients, lesser amounts of deaths in India, despite the fact that we have been criticized for not having the best of the healthcare in the world. That was how we started. We published a few papers, and then we got into the exact understanding of complexity science in context of health in India. And that's from where my journey started. Since then, I have worked on different aspects of complexity science, and I believe it's time when all of us around in different domains, different ecosystems, you call whatever name you want to call it, complexity science is the need of the hour. Because putting it philosophically, as we will evolve on this universe, if we look at from the point of an evolution, so as we spend more and more time on this planet, more and more complexities will come up, more and more complex will situations become, more and more complex will systems become. The scale will evolve, and once the scale evolves, complexity is set in. And as Deepak started out, probably ecosystems are at a scale wherein complexity is still manageable. But if you go beyond ecosystems, and when you start thinking of different aspects, different domains, wherein scale transition is happening at a huge level, complexity will be the talking point, should be the talking point for all of us. And in that sense, I am thankful to Deepak. We started it out. In fact, it was again an emergent thing. He and me, we were on the LinkedIn, and we certainly started out that we are doing something on complexity. We have done a few workshops since then we have done it at my own team. And although I'm primarily focused on seeing complexity evolve in health systems, but my understanding is that if we are able to track our roots, if we are going to our roots as far as the civilization itself is concerned, our own civilization itself is concerned, we have had an understanding of complexity much before people around the world have had. So in that sense, getting a connect, establishing that connect, and being able to use that connect in not just health, in other domains of workspace also will be useful for all of us. And then only we will be able to contributing to the world of complexity science all over the world. So that's where we should be beginning That's my initial takeaways on complexity science. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. Could you also elaborate a little bit on the partnerships that must have been created during the COVID time? Because as heading community medicine,
Tell you a story. I tell you a story on that. It gives you an understanding of complexity science. Not that I believe that you don't understand. All of you understand complexity science. It's just trying to put it in the perspective. We as physicians, or we as people who do research on medical science, when COVID struck us, we thought that we will manage it in a particular way. So, for example, oxygen was something which we were worried about, how to procure oxygen for the hospitals and be able to supply to the patients in a more regular manner. And we had a plan in place. So what we call it as a command system in place, which the system that we usually use for emergencies that we have in the hospital, and large scale emergencies when we have in the hospital. We have a chain of command system. Things will come from there and things will come from here. But at no point in time did we envisage or did we believe that there will be people who will give us oxygen cylinders all of a sudden. At no point in time had we planned for or anticipated that we will be provided food by somebody else, which was not in our own system. So those relationships built, they were emergent relationships. The situation created those relationships, and they all fed into being able to tackle COVID. We had not planned them. The hospital that we initially built, we had not planned it to be built the way it came up. But again, it was because of the fact that people identified the place. This is the place where we need to build the hospital. Then system came in and the hospital came up. So what I'm trying to tell you that you may not, when you are looking at complexity, I always tell people, when you are looking at complexity, keep your eyes open. Things may move on in a way that you may not anticipate or you may plan for. And now that we are into it, I always say, I just finished a paper on it as well. Part of the problem with not being able to understand complexity is not being able to think about or plan about failure. I always say, if you're building a system, you should always accommodate failure as a part of system building itself. The way we say it in health, if I am developing a policy, if I am developing a policy framework, I always tell policymakers, plan for failure. So if you are at this point in time accounting for 100 people for a hospital, account for 130 because 30 may fail. So if you are building in failure as a part of your approach, maybe you are understanding complexity science better. So I always suggest that failure should be inbuilt, and failure margin analysis should be a part of complexity science, which of late people are thinking about as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. Others who want to build on that or share your own stories?
Well, I can chime in there.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Shreyas. I'm with Living Labs Network and Living Labs Institute. What I do is largely to see what place-based long-term engagements can yield. And for us, place is the complex adaptive system that we are engaging with. So complexity thinking for us essentially comes from how do you learn about the place? But just taking from the ongoing conversation, one of the things that we do kind of revisit time and again is safe to fail. When we are engaging with a complex adaptive system where the feedback and feed forward loops are many, which means that, if you're working with craft clusters, the systems that are prevalent there is not the same as, say, working with biodiversity in the region. The systems are complex. Inherently, both the systems are complex, but both of them are interacting in one way or the other. For example, craft communities do take biomotives as one of the inspirations from the local biodiversity where they're actually located. It translates into their design, their crafts, the techniques, and this kind of a translation that happens is quite inherent to a complex adaptive system. And for us, safe to fail essentially comes from this idea of how do we do these smaller experiments. It's okay to kind of, the stakes are not too high, but you do several of this over a longer period of time. which means for us, when we are thinking from a complexity point of view, continuous learning is a non-negotiable. The learning about the system is never complete because it's constantly evolving. Similarly, we also have to kind of evolve along with that. But coming to the partnerships, maybe I will hold back on that because we are talking about safe to fail for now. Maybe that's an important aspect when it comes to complexity thinking. About the partnerships, I will share. I have like several stories because we've been partnering or collaborating with several communities and people, and how it started also is very fascinating because these are all chance encounters. None of them were like very structured and planned, but over time we have learned how do you kind of structure the chaos as well, but it's always messy. So I'll just say that the safe to fail, I think, is a very, very important aspect when it comes to engaging with complex systems.
Thanks, Shreyas.
Shreyas. Hello, everybody. My name is Francis. As you can see, I live in Singapore. I recently joined the emergence group invited by my long-standing friend Deepak, whom I've met a long time ago, along with others here in the group. So I consider myself among friends right now. Yeah. I do not have any kind of like serious professional complexity background, like for instance Dr. Sunil just established. For me, dealing with complex adaptive systems is like dealing with life. And my experience is mainly from working with young people. So I've done many years of community design activities, which are caught under the moniker of meaningful youth engagement, which is a concept that was developed by UNESCO originally, that I tried to adapt with groups of young people in several marginalized communities here in Southeast Asia. Yeah. And what I come across with young people is there is like a mental dichotomy right now, a mental clash, because we are educating. We have been educated ourselves, and we are educating our children also in a very linear way. Yeah. So we need to follow a certain school curriculums, educational curriculum, in order to land a certain job, and then in order to land a certain amount of money, and this is all very linear and very straightforwardly goal-oriented. This is how we educate our kids, and our kids are confronted with a real life situation which is completely different. Because if they have set a goal last week, this week the world has changed. And particularly look at the political, geographical situation that we have seen in the last few years, the environment, the arrival, the onslaught, let me say, of large language models and AI. For these young people, the world is changing much more rapidly than we have prepared them for in our linear way of system. So what I invite these youth communities to do is think of their future as a complex adaptive system. Yeah, because not only the world is a complex adaptive system, not only the environment in which we live is a complex adaptive system. They themselves, as a community, but even as individuals, need to adapt in that way. You need to adapt by doing likewise. And I think from my experience, that this comes down very straightforwardly on a human level to three basic concepts. The first, I will name them, with their index source, since that was how you posited our group in your introduction, Deepak. Yeah, and I would say the first concept of a complex system is anicca. Yeah, which is the Pali word for impermanence. So nothing is permanent. Yeah, nothing stays for long as it. You don't have to explain this to kids; they know. They know, that nothing stays as it is by itself for a long time. But the fact that nothing stays for a long time has a very positive twitch. And people forget this, because the impermanence sort of inherently implies the fact that if there is a problem, the problem will also not be permanent. So solutions are actually reachable. The world is, and their lives, it is makeable. But it is only makeable in very short iterations. So if you consider impermanence as a continuation of short iterations, for every iteration, you will find that there is a makeability. The Pali word is bhavna. Yeah. There's a makeability. There's praxis, and through praxis you can find ways, and praxis is what Shreyas hinted at. Basically, it's empiricism. It's the continuous learning. Yeah? So on an empiricist basis, you can continuously keep learning. And then the third pillar of a complex system that I try to share with these young people is the idea of interbeing. So everything in this impermanence, everything keeps being interconnected with each other. Every element, be it human, be it machine, be it nature, be it animal, be it a weather phenomenon, everything sort of co-influences the other phenomenon. So all phenomena are interrelated very intricately. So in your practice, it often suffices to do very, very little thing, very little experiment, and since the iteration is so small, even the concept of fail fast will not feel as fail. It will just feel as an experiment. So interbeing, makeability, and impermanence. I work with these three concepts, and I feel that when I do this with young people, basically they are teaching me more than I am teaching them. Because because they live this reality every day. And it is urgent that we keep tweaking, or if we can't keep tweaking, that we start tweaking our educational process, and let go of this sense of linearity, which will bring us nowhere.
Beautiful, Francis. So life as a series of short experiments.
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to add something different or bring a new point? Yes, Aditya.
Thank you. Very interesting insights, Francis. I'll just share a little bit about my work and how two different domains are kind of emerging, and I'll share some thoughts, some pointers around. So my work in the last 2, 3 years, 4 years has been centered around, one was education, where I crafted the curriculum for the first year undergraduate students for at the universities. And the problem statement that we began with, and that was the immersion in complexity in a formal sense, Of course, the problems existed much earlier as well, but formal introduction into this domain per se happened about 3.5 years ago. And the idea was, if you look at, related to what Francis also mentioned, that if you look at students or a young person's journey, and if you look from class 9th to class 12th, the way the world is structured, they are entirely focused on what is the next best college or the next, opportunity or a degree program that they can kind of enter into. And the overall goal is that you get a 4-year platform, whatever degree that might be, and then you leap into life, and then you roll around and try to figure out, whatever you can make of it. Now the problem is, and this is not an issue just in India. I think it's a challenge that is kind of global in that sense, and very very rightly said that there is a very linear thought towards education, which in the Indic sense did not used to be so. If you leave the last 200 years aside, particularly. There was a concept of 64 Kalas, which is one area of my Indian knowledge system interest, which is where I'm doing some work. Then the complexity work. So in this particular thing, I crafted a course of 6 subjects, which introduce systems thinking, which introduce global grand challenges, understanding India, systems thinking, technology and policy, and principles of design. Now, we crafted a very different kind of a model to kind of impart all of this. And in parallel, I started another journey to understand about the impact of ultra processed foods, and which is a very very complicated kind of a thing. And the more deeper I go into, and I realize it is much more challenging. This is keeping in mind, how does the country shape policies? How are food systems enacted in the Indic perspective versus the Western perspective? I'm not trying to call or pass judgment on whether one is good over the other. It is just trying to understand, and the impacts of all of that, right? Second is what advantages that you can kind of, take from each of these approaches per se. Right. One is absolutely industrially engineered, crafted food. Second one is a natural, evolving and all of that, and we can have our own definitions of, what is good or bad. But the idea is that these are inherently very, very complex, things. The third track of, complexity comes with, based on my interactions with my guides and a research group which I'm working with. And this is where I find things to be kind of, getting very insightful. And some principles, modeling interactions, which kind of, directions which kind of emerge from here, is that when you talk about complexity, I'll refer my notes which I had made for this. Right, if you bring in the complexity perspective, contextuality is very very important. Meaning depends on the context. Right, and this is coming from Niels Bohr idea of inseparability of a system plus the measurement part. So context directly influences the outcomes. Second is context itself is fluid and evolving. So if you look at content in the context of an ever-changing fluid context, it makes things more complicated, right? Then so some models emerge from this kind of research, which are very formal, which can kind of help understand how you want to understand complexity and all of that. One is contextual probability models. Second one is multi-valued contextual logic. Right, and this is where the complexity and the contextuality link gets established. So this is where the current set of work is focused around. Right, that's pretty much.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can go next.
Please, Raji.
Very different from the background of everyone that's coming. I have come for this. But listening to what we all spoke about a little earlier about failure and giving room for that. So in any kind of large complexity problem that we set to solve, whether it is by an individual organization or different partners joining hands together to solve that. As we say, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? And I'm coming in from the angle of the most complex thing in this is our mind. So traditionally, organizations try to fix their weakest link, whether it's underperforming teams in their, organization, or highly stressed, operational team, which happens in teams that are solving complexities, right? So usually a lot of things that we plan sometimes backfires, causing that link to become a little more brittle and snap under stress. So again, going back to, the weakest link, whether it's a for-profit organization or a non-profit organization, social impact organization, often plagued with fear of exposure, fear of blame, fear of failure, which is what, individually we were referring to earlier also. So to protect themselves, teams in these positions sometimes waste massive amounts of cognitive energy trying to either hold back or hoard data or, something like that, and this creates a massive operational bottleneck from what we've heard in certain stories that have happened in the past. So upgrading from brittle compliance, to a dynamic resilience mindset is where we come in from, and we'd be happy to partner with organizations on bringing in this, mindful intelligence or awareness intelligence when you're fighting or, addressing a large complex problem, because clearly there are enough and more facts and data, proven data, scientific data saying how the brain functions when you meditate and get into mindful intelligence, how your prefrontal cortex improves, gets larger, and the amygdala, which is where the fear center is, that shrinks. So when that shrinks, and when your cognitive overload is taken care of, then lesser chances of errors, right? And we've heard this one from so many so-called masters around the world, that wherever your thought goes, energy flows there. Now, mind creates thought and heart creates that feeling, right? So if you give 1 unit, let's say, just give 1 unit to a thought, which is created by the mind, the feelings that come with it, the energy that goes behind the thought is equivalent to as much as 5,000 units. So you can imagine where really would you want to put your energy, the right way of, dealing with complexity is what I was looking at. And also, so we work with partners who are looking at, so when we look at transformation, it's while the larger picture of transforming a larger community or country or any situation, a lot of transformation begins in a smaller ways, right? Individual transformation, group transformation, community transformation, etc. So I strongly believe our company, I come from the Supermind, and we take meditation and mindful intelligence to organizations. Like I said, organization can be anything. It's not just corporates. Where we believe that awareness intelligence, especially in today's era of artificial intelligence, is so important. We all have that awareness intelligence. We're all born with that. But somewhere along this race to, keep pace, that's forgotten. So anyone getting into any kind of solving those, I think this is a very important factor. That's why I just thought I'll butt in and talk about it.
Thank you, Rajan.
Thank you.
You're putting the emphasis on the inner work that practitioners
Yes.
have to do. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've not heard from a few people, so I will ask if anybody wants to say, especially from people who haven't spoken yet on
Maybe
this issue. Yes.
Just sort of hearing everybody speak has triggered so many different thoughts. So, so I'm by training, I'm a facilitator, and most of my work pretty much all my life has been looking at change and how does change occur in organizations, how does change occur in large systems. And some of the largest systems that I've worked with are things like the Indian education system. I heard Aditya talk a little bit about his work with undergraduate students. And in a country like India, with its enormous differences and diversity of thoughts and values and actions, working with these systems provide you a lot of opportunity to ask more practical questions, I guess, about what is complexity and how does one deal with it. And while I resonate so much with what Francis and Sunil and others have been saying about complexity, I want to talk about it from a more practical perspective, particularly in relation to thinking about complexity through partnerships. So between 2006-07 and 2015-16, in Karnataka, there was a very large program called the Educational Leadership Development Program, which ran in every district in Karnataka except for one. So it ran in 32 districts. And the idea of this program was to, in some sense, do a little bit of what Rajiv was referring to, which is, can we get an entire cadre of educational administrators to change two kinds of systems? One, the system that they operate in their head, so their own internal systems of belief, values, and how they think about themselves and their actions. And the second is, can we look at the way the educational system responds to its community, right, which is children, parents, and teachers. And the program ran with 5 funding organizations. So just to sort of paint you a brief picture of the complexity, right? So 5 funders, including the World Bank, the UNICEF, the Government of Karnataka. We had a Azim Premji Foundation, and we had at that time a massive program in India called Sarva Siksha Abhiyan. Not sure, people remember, it was the fundamental literacy program for India. So 5 funding partners. And there were 5, in some sense, resource organizations partnering together to implement these 2 learning programs, right? Capacity building program, inner work, and an understanding of education such that people could respond differently. And when we bring 5 funders with different world ecosystems in which they operate, their thinking is different, their value drivers are different, and 5 implementing organizations whose ecosystems are different, although everybody says we work broadly within education, it creates for really interesting dynamics and a lot of learning. I was lucky to be a part of this for many, many years. And there were these 2 things that I want to sort of highlight in the context of the question we started with, right? Thinking about partnerships in complex ecosystems. Every complex systems has knowable and unknowable parts, right? In the sense that there are individuals and partners who perceive the complexity of the system and do a categorization in their heads, right? These things are familiar to me, so I can categorize them. These things are unfamiliar to me, and I don't categorize them. And every partner does this categorization in their own way. It's not necessarily that all categories are visible to everyone. So there are invisible elements, there are tacit elements, there are sense, sort of things that you make sense of. But it's not a uniform field, right? So there is this semi-porous kind of a categorization. And because people see these from different vantage points, the boundaries within which people operate tend to become unknowable in the beginning. So I start working in the system, coming in from my imagination of what I think the system is, that I've categorized, and large parts of it that I don't. But I start working from my knowing piece, right? This is what I know. But I am unfamiliar in the beginning as to what are the boundaries and seeing that the others in the ecosystem does. So in the beginning, complexity understanding is a sheer dance, right? We all do this tango. We're not quite sure who's doing what steps, and we try and, put my steps forward and the other does something else. But in this process of tango, two or three things become evident. One, partners begin to be comfortable in revealing their worldviews, right? These are things I know, these are things I don't know. And therefore, partnerships emerge from two or three angles. One, people partner in the knowing parts of the complexity. I understand what you're saying. I work very similar to you. I can complement you. Let's work together. And then there are people who are willing to dance the unknown, right? I'm not quite sure what you're saying. I see the world differently from yours, but I'm still willing to learn, right? And these two kinds of partnerships are very different, right? One takes on, starts from a position of a little more surety and end up in domains of uncertainty, because as you start moving towards it, we begin to understand that we are not alike. We think different. We act differently. Our value systems may be different. So I move from certainty to uncertainty. And then there are partnerships that start from uncertainty, because I really don't know exactly what you're doing, but I'm willing to learn, and move towards certainty. In the 10 years that the ELDP program ran, the partnerships led to the creation of Karnataka's first leadership institute for education, right? Which in Karnataka is called CISLIP. Right? So it resulted in the establishment of institutions that would now look at training and development. It resulted in the training and capacity building of hundreds of sub-district employees. It resulted in curriculum being designed and completely discarded. It resulted in programs that today you will find no mention in any of the policy documents, but were celebrated when we started in the beginning. We thought, yeah, we cracked it, and this is the program that's going to revolutionize education. And the ones that have found their way into the NEP, have found their way into policies in Karnataka, are the tangos that started off from a lot of uncertainty. So with partnerships, I've been particularly really interested in seeing how do we, with all the impermanence, with all the experimentation, with all of the uncertainties that we work with, how do we negotiate boundaries between partners? What is the truth and the vulnerability and the openness with which partners can come into a program? And when they don't, how can we facilitate an ecosystem in which such trust-based openness, sharing takes place? And going back to something that I think everybody has mentioned, how do we create an ecosystem in which uncertainty is not seen as something to be worried or anxious about, but to recognize that, yeah, that's the way it is, complex systems, and how do we move from uncertainty to degrees of certainty and still continue to work? For anybody who's interested in the ELDP program, there's a lot of reports out there. It's now dated in the sense that we exited the program somewhere around 2015-16 when it was institutionalized. But it's an interesting case to sort of look at this interlay of multiple worldviews coming together in a complex system, trying to challenge deep entrenched ideas of hierarchy and roles and so on and so forth. And really looking at parts that can become more, in a sense, habituated, ritualized, routinized, and still parts that remain completely beyond the capacity to discipline, right, or put together in some way. So so people who do want to look at the ELDP can please do so. There's lots and lots of material out there in the world. But it was a really fascinating experience for me with large systems to sort of think about partnerships in that context.
Thank you, Sujata. Hey, Karen, we can stop now. Sujata said everything. Huh? Huh?
Navarun is waiting at an airport to talk. Please give
Yeah,
him.
Navarun. Can you hear us? Can you? But just to say, Sujata, some of the things that you added to the conversation are trust-based, a space for trust-based conversations to happen. The idea of a tango uncertainty. Like I have two left feet, so a tango doesn't. I don't know what can jazz maybe. I can understand jazz, but some amount of uh, unstructured leap of faith when you're trying to dance. I think, and we also spoke a little bit of negotiating boundaries. I think we have to explore that a bit. But who wants to build on what Sujata has just spoken of? Because we have moved into the idea of partnerships and what has made some of the partnerships stick. And she spoke about her experience of Karnataka. Anybody wants to build on this?
I can go next. I'll not exactly build on this, but I'll try to connect some of the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those who don't know me, my name is Zayan and a friend of Deepak's. That's how I'm here. And what else? I am 48 and I've just become an entrepreneur. That's news. The way I thought of
By the way, he's a friend of mine because anything I want to know about water and water issues, I ask him.
Yeah,
It's
Deepak,
very
don't make that
convenient.
surprise, man. You're taking all my limelight.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know, I'm getting. Yeah, no, I'm not going to talk about water for a change. I'm going to talk about my journey into complexity, and I'll break it into three parts. And I'll try to connect the dots that I've heard so far through my journey. I'm not going to make it obvious for you, but let's see if we can find/see those dots. I'm grateful to my fellow speakers because it's made my job easier now. Yeah, before I get into my journey, very quickly about what I've done or what I'm doing right now. I am a natural scientist by training, by a social scientist by choice. I founded a company called Akili Impact. Akili means, in Swahili, Akili means collective wisdom in Kenya. And I'm now working with another company called Aligned Partners to do very similar stuff. I'll come to what stuff. My co-conspirator Jacob John is also in the call, so we're trying to do something. And what's that something? We are trying to, whether it's Akili Impact or Aligned Partners, we're trying to build capacities of organizations and change makers to navigate complex problems. And that's probably a good takeoff point for getting into my journey into complexity. So there are three timelines: past, present, and future. So I started with an extremely certain position in 2012. I went to a conference where I heard the idea, the complex problem for the first time in a design conference. And I applied that to design a water quality network in 2012. The way I developed this idea was I read up on Michael Woolcock and Land Pritchard's idea of how they had defined complex problems. So that definition was high stake, large scale, and high discretion. Learning is an example, right? So think of learning as countrywide, high stakes, future is at stake, and individual discretion. Every teacher teaches differently in a classroom, right? So that's how I try to define the water quality problem. But I looked at it very superficially, mechanistically. So I started with an engineering and program design mindset to sort of think of what kinds of projects, what kinds of partnerships were necessary to solve water quality in India. That was the whole idea. Although I defined the problem as complex problem, the solutioning of that was extremely engineering slash physical sciences driven. And also there's a lot of certainty with which I sort of approach the problem. For those who are interested where we are with the networks, I'll go to that point separately, but that was the past. What has changed in present is from stake, scale, and discretion as three dimensions have moved much more closer to place-based understanding of the problem. And that place could vary from one block to the other, a set of blocks / district to the other, one watershed to the other. So more place-based understanding of problems. more relational and human infrastructure that I did not consider in my engineering days, right? So that's another thing that I've learned, at least in the present. So the uncertainty brought in something interesting. I hated biology when I was in grade 12, but now I see my evolution, to borrow a biological term, because everybody talks about evolution, ecosystems, adaptations. Look at these terms. These are terms that we learned in biology. And I see a gradual movement towards more biological understanding of complexity as I grow older to the present days. And I would bring Dave Snowden's idea of estuaries and how an estuary holds a tension between fresh water and saline water, and yet is one of the most productive and rich hotspot for biodiversity. I think that's a really interesting metaphor to understand how keeping things at tension, yet keeping things within the bounds of uncertainties, and yet be productive and yet be problem solving. That is, a real interesting place for me to explore at this point. And going forward, one thing I would really like to explore as an individual and as somebody who's sort of setting up an organization so started with engineering, moved towards more biology. Now I would say spirituality. As we grow older, I guess that's a normal progression at an individual level as well. So what kinds of personal healing a change maker, what kinds of spaces for healing that an organization needs to stay sane in our difficult times? So I think we should also acknowledge the times that we live in, right? So, and still talk about complexity. Another journey another thing for the future would be, how do I strip away sophistication from the complexity language and build a vocabulary that connects with our everyday language, and hopefully build new partnerships that are beyond the scope of this room, and perhaps the kind of people that we don't even consider right now as part of our partnerships. Another part of the future thinking that I'm doing is, how can I make tacit indigenous knowledge more explicit and make it to do tango, to borrow Sujata's phrasing, with scientific and codified knowledge. And a specific example would be drought, right? It's an occurrence that happens across the world. Is there a way that you can think through droughts as a complex problem and look at indigenous knowledge in consonance with scientific and codified knowledge and come up with some kind of a mechanism to adapt to droughts, to be more resilient, and at the same time, build robust systems that allows you to sort of move from a point of crisis to a point of recovery, and in fact thrive in those situations. I think those are the things that I would be interested in as I sort of go forward. So past, present, and future. And I want to be in this journey for next 20 years. So wish me luck.
That's good. Thank you. I think Shakti has his hand up. Hi, Shakti. If you can also introduce yourself a bit.
Hi, Deepak. Hi, Kiran. Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you. I'm sorry I'm traveling and I joined in only 15 minutes late. So, but since Deepak said to introduce myself. So I'm Shakti Saran. I'm based in Mumbai, but right now I'm in Geneva. I'm visiting my daughter here, and my work is really in the change making space. So I support change makers through a platform called Shaktify, and Shaktify's mission is to support both social and environmental change, leading to a thriving humanity and a planet. And we achieve this mission through a series of workshops, webinars, and master classes. Yeah, this topic is really very interesting, and thank you, Deepak, and for everyone who's contributed to making this such a vibrant session. This whole thing about CAS is just very fascinating. But I wanted to just dwell on some of the points that struck me whilst some of the people were speaking. So this whole thing about perspectivist thinking, and I don't know if this was covered, Deepak, in the first 15 minutes, but perspectivist leadership is of the highest rank today, and it's very, very much related to complex adaptive systems. Yeah, so the ability to take multiple points of view and build that into our assessment, into our understanding, is something which I found extremely useful. It helps us to move away from ideology when you're able to appreciate different points of view. And this then links into what Francis and Raji had to say, because Francis spoke, a lot about impermanence, and Raji spoke about, the advantages of meditation. And it's only when our external reality and our internal reality are in alignment that we come up with the right perception, and the ability to solve problems gets significantly enhanced. Yes, so I think that's really very, very crucial to be able to take on multiple perspectives. We need to have something within us that moves us away from our bigotry, our intolerance, our hatred, our craving, our clinging. So I think that's really very crucial. And I'm glad to see this conversation, moving in the direction of, aligning external and internal reality. So that's what I just wanted to add my 2 bits to it. And, thank you all. It's been a very interesting session.
Thank you, Shakti. I'm cognizant of time. We have half an hour left. Yes, Karen. I wanted to build on some of the Karen. Wanted to build some of the
hand up. If you
Sorry?
Jacob put his hand up.
Yes. Jacob also put his hand, and also Professor Sunil Raina had put up his hand up just before Ryan had put up.
Now I'd like
his
to add
hand.
one
So
line to
I
it.
think both Sunil and Jacob.
Yeah.
Sunil, is it okay if I allow Jacob to speak first? Yeah, because he hasn't had a chance. Thank you. Yes, Jacob.
Hi. So my name is Jacob, and I don't want to add and repeat a lot of the points, but I just want to build on a couple of things that came out for me. So for me, in terms of my own journey with complexity, I think I like to start with the personal and then take it to the professional. And I believe they're connected in whatever way they are in my head. So when I was from the time I can remember, when I was about 10 years old, both my parents were diagnosed with various diseases, like hypertension, heart disease, and all of that, right? So, and then later kidney disease and so on and so forth. And then my dad passed away about 10 years ago. So from my childhood at about 5-6 years old, my engagement with medical science has been, in a sense, very, very deep, right? And there's always, and it's also because there's familiarity in the system, there's lots of relatives or doctors, all of that, but there's also this thing about, what does medical science say about a particular disease, about a particular, a particular condition, right? And so on. Now, what I realized is the shifts that actually have taken place every 5 to 6 years, right? And I've seen this firsthand, right? In terms of the various shifts that's actually taken place, and all the, from the time of early time of saying no to coconut oil, and all of that, and now it's like coconut oil seems to be like some magic trick that everybody seems to be drinking and all of that stuff, right? So there's a whole range of shifts which actually have taken place. There's knowledge on the gut microbiome, which was kind of like, if you look at the ancient Ayurvedic systems or even the traditional Indic systems, there is an emphasis on the gut, right? So, and when I look back at various life events in this way, and even when I look back at my work in complexity in my professional side, I see it maybe 3 things which I feel are important. One is being present. And maybe I guess it's related to what Shakti just talked about, of the internal realities and external, linking the external and internal reality. So it's like being present for in that situation and acknowledging the situation as it is. And and the second thing is really around staying engaged, because one of the, partnerships happen when we stay engaged, right? So and this is like a little bit of a hark back to earlier systems of of our village systems or earlier systems where the thing is, one of the easy things about about the world today is that we can kind of switch into a very narrow world with very similar and shared interests. Complexity requires us to, in a sense, go to a village kind of setting where the people around you are people you not necessarily like, but they are just there. So you have to deal with it, and you have to deal with all shades of complexity and interactions, right? So, and whether it is the willingness, and that also encourages us to to talk about, work through difficult situations, knowing that you need the other person in the room. So this kind of talks to a little bit to the point that Sujata as well brought up, right? So the idea that partnerships have some part of it is from the known and to the unknown, others from the unknown to the known as well. So yeah, and like even in the work that I've done with in the work that I've done in agriculture, in the criminal justice system in Maharashtra, all of these aspects have actually really come up in a very real way. And the willingness to just engage and stay humble and to say, you know what, I don't know the answers. I need other people in order to solve. And that is a skill. That's a skill that we need in 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold, because the thing is, our schooling system and everything has encouraged us to say, get first in class. And instead of that, what we should say is more like, can all of us get first in class together? And that's a very different mindset. Thanks, Deepak.
Thank you, Jacob. Beautiful. Sunil, sorry.
Navarun was wanting to talk. You can allow him.
That's okay. That's okay. Meaning, I asked you to wait.
Okay. I just wanted to make a few quick points because one was probably on the understanding of complexity itself. Now, what we have been talking till now is probably more complicated than complex. Now, a complicated system may have 3 or 4 things that can be tweaked here and there, and we will have an answer to that situation. But a complex system will need much more understanding, better understanding than a complicated system. So that's where I would like to emphasize that we need to be more careful with our understanding of complex versus complicated. That's one part of it. Second is, Francis was right in talking about impermanence. But when you talk about impermanence, we are not talking of complexity. If I'm teaching kids impermanence, I'm not teaching complexity. Complexity is actually an evolutionary thing. It evolves. And I don't believe that the kids of today across India are living in a more complex world, and they evolve much more rapidly, much more faster, and we will be able to teach them. I give an example, very short example. My daughter was to appear in the NEET exam appeared in the NEET exam, which initially got cancelled. She was scoring around 640. Now the NEET is cancelled. She is preparing around now. I was surprised that she was able to adapt it to much more better than I had thought her to be able to adapt. Primarily because of the fact that the kids around her were able to galvanize together and think about, now we have to sort it out. How do we want to sort it out? So if I'm going to teach her given lessons, she will say, she even tells me now, don't give me your lessons. They don't help me. They don't make a difference. So again, I say, they are much more faster. And the problem with the kids or the education system at this point in time, we tend to forget. They don't learn from us. I'm a teacher also. I teach medical students. But they don't learn from us. There are 110 different sources from them to gather their information from. And they all teach them differently. So even if I want to tweak the fact that I will teach them something, then they will change their lives, I'm not very sure that I will be able to do it. One thing that I have realized over a period of time, if I am to take anything as a means of communication in complex sciences or complexity science, if I have to tell people that this is something that you need to be teaching students when you are talking about complexity, I would say it's balance. Balance is the only thing that I need students to be aware of. And that balance is something which is civilizational both, as well as something which holds the key as far as complexity science is also always is concerned. You need to know what to say, how much to say, and what not to say. That balance is there. If you say more, you are taking them towards chaos. If you say less, you are taking them towards the other side. So that balance is the key, and that's critical to us as far as our civilizational ethos is also concerned. And lastly, I also want, when we talk about complexity science, within inbuilt in complexity science is a concept of precautionary principles, and that precautionary principles concept usually saves us from going from a high degree of uncertainty towards a low degree of uncertainty. So that precautionary principles inbuilt within the complexity science is something that is the balance between high degree of uncertainty and the low degree of uncertainty. That's all that I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. Just to probe a little bit about how your daughter is responding to the NEET exams, what are you noticing in what's present in abundance amongst her peer group that she's able to dip in and get the support required?
I think the best thing that happened to her was when it was declared that the exam is going to be cancelled. I was away and I called her and I will be back by evening. Don't worry. That was one thing which was reassuring in a sense. But by the time I reached, she's a part of a group of people who have been working together or doing the preparations together. So she spoke to them, and most of them said it's bad. It's not gone in our favor. We had done very well, but we have to do it again. That's a fact. We have to do it again, and because we have to do it again, we need to do it in a better way now. And how do we do it better way now? They decided that they won't do anything today. They will start from tomorrow. Today is something that they will enjoy to the full, and they will start from tomorrow. And tomorrow morning, they decided that we will divide it into these. So that evolution that came through their own understanding of how to tackle this problem was brilliant. I understood from her. It took her. Now, I was expecting her to do her revision in maybe 21 days. She did it in 15, 16 days, only because of the fact that they were glued to what they had thought was the solution to the problem. So that's what I was trying to emphasize on. The partnership, the get-togetherness, the people who are around her, who know the problem better than I know it, because the students around her are in the same situation as she is in. They know it better than I know it. And the fact that they all gelled together, they all thought that this problem needs to find a solution. And this is the way we need to find a solution. That's how they did it.
Thank you, sir. Now, Varun, if you're still around. Did you disappear? Oh, hi.
No, hey, sorry. No, I mean, this is really fascinating conversation. I apologize. Unfortunately, because of the travel situation, I had to, I couldn't join the start. But yeah, I mean, I think as I'm hearing all of your point of views, I sort of think there's an interesting perspective that I probably bring into this discussion, which is the narrative, the much more inner complexity that we all have, right? And I know there are various points about complexity we talked about, but I think some of the work that I have been doing over the last couple of years, particularly around this idea called a story as an event. Mostly stories are thought of as a book or a thing, right? It's a story, it's passed down, it's kept on the shelf. But where I think my complexity, my story journey and the complexity kind of matched is because stories by themselves inherently are complex. It's a human thing, right? It's a human event that actually happens and that allows us to, again, borrowing from complexity is something new emerges based on certain conditions. So if you think of a storm is when certain pressure, atmospheric conditions, water vapor temperature, all of that has to come together in a particular way. If it's less, it's not a lesser storm. It's just there is no storm. Similarly, I think when we talk about stories, there's this emergent property that happens, and I think why it's particularly important at this point in time, particularly with AI, generating so much content out there. Like it's going to be very soon. Another idea that I have is that we have a supply demand issue, which is the human is just not able to accept the amount of content that's getting generated, multimodal content that's getting generated. So my point being, and I think it sort of also connects to Professor Sunil, there's this whole idea of accretion versus residue. And I think there are certain human stories that actually help us develop residue in us. Again, it emerges based on a certain condition that happens, which actually changes our lives or changes to the future. And then what you also think of what's going on with AI generated content. Yes, there is accumulation. In Hindi, it's called darakta. Like you keep building layers upon layers upon layers, but it's not a residue. It's just accretion. You can search it. It's searchable. You can go back. You can figure it out, but it doesn't really change your life. And I think that's a very interesting perspective that has moved me over the last couple of years, which is around, again, non-linearity. If you think about from complexity or the emergent properties, or for that matter, just the fact that the initial conditions, right? A very interesting story that comes to mind is Albert Einstein. He kind of, towards the end of his life, he tells about this story that what really got him interested was this compass. I think he was 4 or 5 years old when he first came across a compass, and it fascinated him that this needle was there was a force acting on a needle, like invisible force that was acting on the needle, and you could turn it in any direction. It didn't matter. It would just point to this one particular direction. And that story, that little story that he had in his mind about this invisible power, energy, whatever you want to call it, that in a very interesting way decided his life and everything that he brought into this world. And I think those are going to be important for us as we go forward, particularly again in relation to AI, in terms of how do we build residual stories in partnerships in our day-to-day life, versus yes, there's going to be content everywhere, and how do we sort of keep it clean is what I'm going to contribute at this point.
Thank you, Noran. Karen?
Yes. So, for me, complexity is very simple. Yeah. It's people, right? You look at any situation, you look at any of the stories that have been shared over here. Yeah. I always say that, the smartest people are asked to do science, and then we leave the rest to do psychology and literature and all of that. And then science helps us to create the biggest bomb, the biggest weapons, create war, okay? And yet, none of us can ever find a way to diffuse that by understanding the people who make those decisions to have the war, right? Because complexity of every situation really comes from the intervention of people, decisions by people, right? Actions of people. So for me, complexity really is about first understanding the people in the ecosystem from two aspects. One is those who take the decisions to make the systems complex. Yeah. Because life started with just living in nature, and that's it, I guess, living with nature or whatever you want to call it, right? However you believe the universe started, all right? And life on Earth. And today we are talking about going to Mars and then bombs and war and what more, right? So we have complicated it. every single situation is because of the actions and decisions that people have taken. So that's one part of it. The second part of that complexity is the impact. And I use the word now very consciously because I usually do not use the word impact the way we use it in the development sector, because we really don't. How can you impact people's life positively in no time at all? But you can impact people's life negatively in almost immediately, almost instantly, right? You just have to say something really, really stupid or bad. That's it. And you can impact someone's life, changes them. So for me, it boils down to that if, and again, Simon Sinek's, it's so famous, right? Everybody says, start with the why. I'm sorry, I disagree. Start with the who. Start with the who, and you'll understand both sides of that equation. Who's taking decisions, who's taking the actions, and who's getting affected by it. You will start unraveling complexity very fast. Every single complex situation is actually on both these sides of the equation, is a result of both sides of this equation. So at least I'll stop here, or maybe just one more line and I'll say we did two very big, large partnerships, significant ones. One was during COVID, which was with 240 partners. We impacted more than 2 million lives directly, no indirect, multiply by 4 because it's a family and all of that. Nothing of that. Directly, with evidence, hardcore evidence down to the village level, panchayat level, to say who was the person, what was their gender, what did we do for them, etc. Right? So that's one story, and hopefully we'll have another time to talk about that. And we moved from the pandemic into cyclones, floods, droughts, fire, landslide, all of that and more, right? Including, of course, oxygen and everything. The second example is exactly this, the RISE PECOWorld Summit. 13 years ago, when we started it, people told me, are you mad? Nobody will come to your event, right? We went to 84 countries. We did 30,000 people, right? We're again restarting. We again cannibalized that entire system. Why? Because we understood that we're doing nothing. We're doing simple stuff. And if we have to tackle complexity, then we need to do something more. And so when you can bring 100 partners together to give of their time, 200 experts to give of their time, pro bono, not looking at financials, that's when you're starting to unravel complexity, right? And you're dealing with people who understand that partnership is not about funding and about who's going to get what visibility and what credibility and what kind of logo size and stuff, but believing that everybody's working towards a similar cause, and therefore the complexity starts coming down. And I know I'm simplifying it. If Tathagat was on this call, he would have said this is reductionism. Yeah. But honestly, my honest belief is that it is truly people, okay, that make situations complex. Otherwise, life would be very simple.
Karen, 15 years back, they were asking you, are you mad? Are they not asking the same thing of you today?
Especially today.
The question has not changed.
Yes, we've completely cannibalized our existing successful model of 12 years. And again, we are back to, disrupting what we are trying to do, failing in some ways and, hopefully gaining in some others. But yeah, absolutely. The thing remains the same.
George, sorry.
Yeah, this has been really great listening to scientists, physicians, teachers, impact people. I'm an artist. I studied art. I've taught art. I was on the board of studies at the local art college. And generally, over the past few decades, I've been very interested in how people learn to draw or learn drawing and the uses they have for it. What I will talk about very quickly, because I think we have run out of time, is one experiment that we started about 17 years ago as part of our not-for-profit, which works in the area of art and culture. Our project essentially was trying to look at social ways of learning art. Do you need to go to an art school? So fundamentally, everyone here, all your very first skill, all of you learned was drawing. Even before you learned how to speak, drawing helped you to learn letters and numbers. So all of you learned drawing, but most of you stopped after some time. So it's a very fundamental skill. It's like your skill with numbers or skill with words, but people drop thinking in pictures. Very few people. I know Francis does. I know Deepak does. So some of us think in pictures, but we have been conditioned to think in words and numbers. And when you ask people to think in pictures today, they find it very weird, or they find it crazy. So 17 years ago, we started a experiment. We call it citizen art, in the same vein as citizen science or citizen journalism. The idea that art can be a driver for civic initiatives. 17 years ago, it was a very simple experiment. 5 of us went out, started drawing, and people who would join would draw. Now, 17 years later, 2 lessons we learned. Lesson number 1, when we first built the framework, we made very tight rules. We had a very well-designed framework. It didn't work, right? What we realized was that emergence fights with all your pre-planning and pre-optimization and over-optimization and all of that. Over-engineering doesn't survive, right? In the second iteration of the project, we pared down all the rules. We kept it extremely simple. People who attend our events don't register. We don't collect their email IDs. We don't give them any forms to fill. We just tell them where to land up, and people land up there with a book and a pencil. Extremely simple framework. And what we realized was it gives rise to 2 things: spontaneous behavior, that's collective behavior, and people self-organize. So for instance, this entire organization is just run by 2 people, Smita and me. And there are times when we cannot make it to these events. It doesn't matter. The community somehow self-organizes, somehow manages. One person figures out who's going to lead, another person figures out who's going to take the pictures and all of that. So what the lesson I learned from my art experiment is that if you want to build an ecosystem around things like citizen art, start with very simple things. And simple things come together to form really complex behaviors, from what we have noticed. And why I'm saying this is, last year, our community exhibited at the National Gallery of Modern Art, which is kind of impossible to think of these things 17 years ago. We wouldn't have had these opportunities. But because people self-organize, because people come together and have new aspirations, it just evolves out of nothing. So keep things, so at least what I have learned is simple structures can lead to very complex outcomes. Yeah.
Thank you, John. We have 5 minutes. The discussion was interesting. For us, did we, in the spirit of exploring, are we anywhere closer to understanding what makes partnerships work in complex environments?
I think I'll just take a shot at it. And I think what just George mentioned right now is that most of it is self-organizing. You cannot really predict, right? Interests will develop, but interest alone is not the driver. You might be working on similar topics, but then there are a whole lot of things which are hidden. Uncertainty itself is not, disclosed by its very nature. So as things will unravel, I think that interest will transform into probably outcomes and actions that follow up, and that is where probably the partnerships will become more concrete, where 2 or 3 or 4 or n number of people might want to say, okay, this is the direction that we want to go to. This is and the who part that Karen mentioned, right, emerges out of these interactions itself. And surprisingly, the why comes later, right? And as she had rightly said, keep chasing the why. But I think who comes first when you're talking about the partnership, especially, right? A lot of things have to work before you start answering the why, which comes later over interactions. And then all the who's in that equation will self-organize and probably walk in the same direction, which is where we talk about partnerships, creating concrete outcomes, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you, Aditya. Sujata, you've written a long thing. You may want to explain that. No, please. Some of us
I think we've run out
benefit
of
from
time. I
you
think
speaking.
Francis wanted to say something. So
I have a very short answer on what Deepak asks. How do we know whether how partnerships will work in a complex system? The answer is we don't, because if we would, the system would not be complex. It's an inherent feature of a complex system that you cannot know whether your partnership will tick or not. You have to experiment. You have to, as Sujata has so nicely described, you have to start with this undecided tango and see where it goes.
So the question in my head, sorry, Francis, for cutting you off, is can we, using Ayan's example of estuary, can we design the estuary in such a way where this has a higher chance of probability?
I can agree when you say higher chance. Yeah.
Sorry?
I can agree when you say a higher chance of working, but ultimately we will never know until we do. This is the power of bhavna, of praxis. Yeah, it's the praxis of working in the system.
Yeah.
That keeps keeps providing us with this empirical value.
Yeah, maybe thanks, Francis. Maybe a quick addition, Deepak. Sorry for barging in. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's not so much about the designing the estuary, it's about creating conditions for an estuary to evolve into an estuary. That's the idea. Some of these estuaries will evolve into an estuary, others will fail, but that's fine. The idea is to keep working at the conditions that make an estuary.
Thank you. Professor Sunil, you had your hand up.
Yes, I think why did we evolve into complexity science? That's something that we need to understand. So why didn't we think about complexity science maybe in the 1980s, or if very little was thought about it? Probably because we want to find solutions to problems, and that will always remain unless and until we are able to find solutions to the problems. We are not actually moving forward, and complexity science is one of the ways to find solutions to problems. Do we have solutions at hand? We may not have those solutions, but do we have the pathways to solutions? We do have the pathways to solutions. So answering Francis's question is right. We may not have a very high degree of certainty with our solutions. We may not have those, the probability may not be high. But the pathways which complexity science enables us, it gives us the lead into the ways to solving a problem. And we may fail, that's fine. But we are at least trying to find the solution. That ability to find a solution in using complexity science, the probability of finding a solution through complexity science is higher than through other sciences, and that's why complexity science is important. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Anyone wants to have a last word before we close?
That will be you, Deepak.
No, I think Shreyas had his hand up. I couldn't respond to him in time. Shreyas, did you want to say anything?
Well, I was just wanting to jump into the conversation, but I think the time is almost up. So, but I can tell that at least when it comes to conversation around complexity and complex systems, this is like a tendency that I have noticed in multiple conversations, that everyone is so engrossed in explaining or trying to kind of get a grasp on what complexity is. In that process, I think we kind of lose out on the contexts in which we have discovered it. And yeah, I think the conversation was fascinating. And as always, there is a relative notion of what complexity is and where we all come from. And that relational or relative understanding of a system is something that I find very humbling, because as one of the speakers said, it is always not, there's no point in trying to kind of understand a complex system in its entirety, because it is just not possible to do that. And you do need partnerships. And how do you build those partnerships? do we have organizational structures, ways of working that enables that, which is what I think what Deepak was referring to as designing the estuary. But can organizations create these kind of enabling conditions? Do we have infrastructures that enables that? These are like bigger questions that we are essentially also like, thinking about and building either in the space of learning through Living Labs Institute or through more long-term engagements across different aspects of a place in Bidar. So yeah, I think sometimes I think we should not talk about complexity as much as talking about the context where complexity thrives. So yeah, because otherwise the tendency to define complexity in a complex system can be endless.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll bring this conversation to close. And thank you, Karen, for giving the opportunity for us to discuss this amongst ourselves and also for the people who are listening to all of us. I won't try to sum it up because I think that's going to be difficult for me or rather impossible.
Complex.
But no, not really, because I was also listening from my own lens and my own biases, and I was noticing that I was agreeing with some and disagreeing with others, and that's coming up in the conversation because I really resonated with some of the things that, for example, as a Buddhist, I'm very fairly Francis Laliman biased. So that's one, but also the idea of Ayan's example of estuary for me, Sujata's metaphor of tango, I think this will remain with me. And also Jacob's idea of humility. What does it take? How do I approach this with a sense of humility? Even Shakti's idea of how do we allow multiple perspectives while we're even solving something that. And I think I was not hoping that we'll come to a conclusion, but I think because all of us are attempting this to think about it in the first place while we are also doing like building the ship while we are sailing situation. But I'm happy we had this conversation. And thank you so much. I know, especially for Sujata, now it's quite late for her. Thank you very much. Francis, thank you very much because it's also late for you, all of you. And for others who are not late, thank you for being there, nevertheless.
So I'm going to do a small quick plug if I may. We
Sure.
have a session called the Architecture of Convergence that will be happening every day at different times so that it helps more people make it more convenient for them. So if that's of interest, please join. And there's only one of this session, which is the Koru toolkit that I have, which I've kind of compiled, will be happening tonight at 8 p.m. So just in case anybody would like to be a part, happy to pick brains, happy to converse. It's an open platform. There is no presentations, no major discussion. It's anyone can come and we just chat. That's the idea of that. Yeah. So just wanted to share that. But thank you all very much. It was really wonderful having you all. I think this was probably the heaviest session that we had and will have in the whole summit. But I think it was brilliant because it just shows the diversity of our group. And I just hope that when we put this out, and this is not going to go in the recording, obviously, but when we put this out, we'll have a lot, and we've stopped the recording. So we will have a lot more people interested, and we should, because I think it's really important, very important. And the wealth of experience and knowledge and wisdom that exists here is something that we need to take out to the world. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.